Don, and thank you everyone for having me today. David, Chairman Simon Crean, it's a pleasure to be here in Canberra. Just saying to Simon before, it's quite interesting being here at this hotel because it's one of Canberra's quite unique modern political artefacts. It was opened in, I think, 1972 by Doug Anthony, and then since then, throughout the next 20 years, I think it was home to a number of party conferences on both sides of the ledger, and a lot of very interesting things have happened here in this hotel. So it's great to see it reinvigorated the way it is these days as a QT hotel with all the political imagery around the place. It is a really great pleasure to be here today. You may wonder what a bank is actually doing here today, talking to everyone. It actually follows on from a conference we held internally at the Commonwealth Bank about 6 months ago, where I asked Sam Brown to come and talk to our team internally about how the industry was going and managing its affairs and how it was going and being able to strike the right balance. And he brought along quite a number of really good and interesting insights which he shared with our team, and we really appreciated that. So in return, he asked me if I'd come down today and give a talk. And I do love the theme of this conference. I think it's a really important theme about striking the right balance. Although I'm not quite sure about the title that was given to my section about being the mastermind. So to help manage your expectations today, I'm going to assure you that I'm not the holder of any big secret about how to achieve this social balance. If I was, you'd never read about banks in the newspapers, and I'd be living on a tropical island somewhere very happily. I will be, though, happy to take a lot of questions at the end of my presentation. I think measuring success is largely out of our hands in most regards. A large part of the balancing act falls to people like me on how we do our jobs in the overall business. Reputation matters enormously, and effective management of your voice and perception is becoming more and more critical to business success. My role at the CBA, though, is not to manage its reputation per se. That's the job of every single worker within the organisation. My team, on the other hand, have the job of managing those stakeholders who talk about us. They deal on average between 290 and 370 media calls a month. We have on average 2 face-to-face meetings with politicians every working day. We're dealing with more than 100 community organisations, and our social media activity is simply mind-boggling and never-ending. So today I want to talk a little bit about how we meet that challenge and what our approach is, and what the lessons that we've learned in recent times through a few of the issues that we've had. While we probably couldn't find two industries more different in their nature than banking and the live export trade, we both do share a very similar world of scrutiny, regulation, critics, and what can often feel like very few friends, especially in this town, Canberra. Now, I just want to test everybody's age in the room. I think we might just I've got a short video I just want to play and see if people can remember this.
And what do you do for a living, David?
Me? I'm a banker.
So that ad was by St George Bank back in the 1990s, and I mean, I love the moment where the dog stops and the kids stop playing in the pool. It worked very well for St George back then. They were then a small bank largely based in New South Wales. What they were doing was positioning themselves against the broader perception of the industry, and that is the uncomfortable truth for us is that people don't like their banks. Actually, there's a long list of things that people don't like. They don't like their banks, they don't like supermarkets, they don't like petrol companies, they don't like insurers, they don't like telcos, they don't like unions. The list goes on and on. Banks fall into the grudge category of life. Everyone needs one, and you've got no choice. They're generally big and bureaucratic businesses, which make way too much money and pay executive people way too much salary. They also don't like too much the people that talk about banks. They don't like our CEOs, they don't like the media, and they don't like politicians. So we're starting from a very strong, entrenched position of distrust, dislike, and cynicism. This is despite a litany of facts about our business which can construct a very different picture. We know our customers are overall quite satisfied with their service and support. They very much like the technology, the apps, the convenience of our products like credit cards. Since 2006, we've been measuring our customer satisfaction via Roy Morgan, and we've seen the Commonwealth Bank climb from a terrible fourth place of 64% satisfaction to satisfaction levels now sitting at the top of the Big Four at 82%. We've come through a period of the global financial crisis as a strong and stable institution. We never had to call upon the government guarantee, nor have we had mass staff retrenchments, amalgamations, or any other big bad things that have happened to banks overseas. But these are facts. And facts matter little when the debate is emotional. So now what we're seeking to do is balance the debate. We're seeking to craft the emotional story that balances the debate between emotion and facts, effectively striking that right balance we need to get regulation, accountability, and profitability right. Within the perceptions of the banking sector, CBA has held a very prominent position in the emotional debate for both good and bad reasons for a number of years. We are Australia's largest bank, and in fact we're currently Australia's largest listed company by market capitalisation, which is sitting at around $130 billion. We're not Australia's oldest bank. Our competitors at Westpac have about 100 years on us, but we do have more than a century behind us of being very much at the forefront of public focus, first being government-owned and then our float 25 years ago. That float by the Keating government was one of the largest privatisations in modern times and brought in about 800,000 direct shareholders from every walk of life, the mum and dad shareholders, and millions more as indirect owners of CBA today through their superannuation funds. So from being a publicly owned institution to now a publicly listed company, CBA has firmly cemented a position in the Australian psyche as being the people's bank. It's a position which also has afforded us the opportunity to speak and come forward. And that's why we're now focused even more strongly on how we can tell our story well. How can we get to the right people with the right information about us? How can we get our voice right in this debate and understand it's more about emotion than facts sometimes, and respond in a way that isn't defensive or critical, but it's empathetic and it understands where the issue has come from in the first place. There are usually two different occasions in which banks are thrust into the public affairs space. The first is when we make a mistake, either by design or a stuff-up. An example here has been the very high-profile issues which have happened within the financial advice or the wealth management business owned by the bank, and then lately within our insurance business. I'll return to both of these issues soon. The second is when the broader public policy settings about our sector are in focus. Issues like profits, fees, and design around credit cards, competition, and other products. On both occasions in the past, we've been often too slow to accept that where we were wrong, we've not put things right. We were not listening carefully enough to our stakeholders to understand their concerns. Sometimes our silence was driven by our internal desire to understand what had happened and to fix things quickly, but that silence also gets interpreted as arrogance. When the noise and the emotion around the first and the second start to converge into one, that's when the politicians start to respond. Politics has always been a 99% lag sport, and legislation is often a rear vision instrument. So while we are far from delighted, we do understand that the call for a Royal Commission into banks has been the very predictable emotional argument that defies all the facts around our sector. The fact that we are already Australia's most heavily regulated and scrutinised industry probably doesn't matter. In fact, at CBA, we joke that you can't get into an elevator without running into somebody who works for APRA or ASIC. These calls are not new. Royal Commission's been the policy of the Greens and One Nation for years, but I guess that's all for another discussion. Our challenge, though, is how do we tell our story well? So I want to share with you some of the focus that we've now sought to bring into telling our story well. And we started this year in our full year results by testing a new approach with a very small group of our stakeholders. For many years, we've disclosed the facts about our business in a very dense and hard to read investor pack. And perhaps we've not done a very good job of explaining what it all means. Usually all you read about is the headline figure, and that is record-breaking profits. Of course we bank record profits. We are Australia's largest company, and everybody wants a profitable bank. You don't want unprofitable banks. But in August we started to unpack some of these figures, and we started to test and learn a new approach. We launched a digital platform called Strong and Stable, which I've got a short video just to demonstrate. It's a little bit hard to show live. It goes for about 40 seconds, but what I want to explain about this is that this has been designed to get out of the investor pack and create a tool which is digital, can be used on any type of mobile device, and starts to go through some of the key facts and figures about our business. It seeks to explain what our business is all about. What we've found is something quite incredible. When we share this with our people, they are very keen to be able to use this at the barbecues, to be able to get the conversation going again when the dog has stopped eating. So it goes through a number of slides here. Some of these facts are interesting, but the point I want to make about putting up these facts is that there is an emotional side to these stories. The Commonwealth Bank pays $7 billion in dividends every year. $7 billion in dividends is roughly equivalent to the Rudd stimulus package that happened after the global financial crisis. Each and every year we work to return our dividends to our shareholders in the form of effectively an economic stimulus package. And remember, our shareholders are those 800,000 mum and dad investors who bought the CBA shares back when it floated. We also pay out $6 billion in salaries. We've got 51,000 jobs, 40,000 are here in Australia, 10,000 are in New Zealand and in Hong Kong. But importantly, when we talk about our jobs, we need to start talking about what they are. In the Commonwealth Bank's case, none of our call centres that are customer-facing have been sent overseas. They are based here in Australia. We have 5,000 small business suppliers that work with our business. And my favourite statistic of all is the fact that we pay $3.6 billion in tax. $3.6 billion in tax funds annually the total budget of the Department of Agriculture plus the AFP. Or even better, my favourite, it funds the ABC 3 times over. So I guess while a product like this is a very tactical exercise, you can see that strategically we're looking to do a better job of how our business works. We've only just started. By sharing this with just our 50,000 employees, we've seen it be shared another 60,000 times on social media. All this helps in the process of a public policy debate. We're effectively helping the people who talk to our customers about us be better informed. We help our people and our shareholders to be able to respond to those questions at the barbecue. However, when issues go wrong, this is when we've learned a great deal about how to approach the problems. All the work we do in explaining our business is meaningless if we don't understand how to respond to issues when they do go wrong. And in these circumstances, it's important that we do 3 things very well. First, that we listen carefully. Second, we apologise. And third, we ensure that we're not being too defensive in our response. As a rule of thumb, when something goes wrong, there's generally a standard pattern of emotion that is experienced. It's the 4 stages of emotional reaction and understanding. And understanding where you are in that process is half the battle. Those 4 stages are shock, anger, retribution, and recovery. This pattern of emotional response and understanding it is critical to getting your response right and your message through. I'll take our first issue that we had a couple of years ago, which was financial planning. It was mid-2013, in fact it was my 3rd week on the job, when Adele Ferguson from the Sydney Morning Herald called to ask about a remediation program that had been undertaken with some of our financial advice customers. At that time, with the business being pretty close to the issue and some $50 million already having been refunded, we figured that this was something we'd known about internally and had been dealing with for a number of years. We actually thought it was old news and there was nothing to see here, and we could absolutely explain everything. We were very defensive, and that was our first mistake, especially as this was the first time this story was being published or told more broadly outside the bank. The story for our own community and for our people, our customers and our shareholders was one of shock. Shocked that there had been this group of poorly behaved financial planners who in the lead up to the global financial crisis were taking advantage of customers, giving them poor or wrong advice. After the financial crisis, these advisors came to our attention and work had started to remove them and remediate the customers. But it was slow and it was difficult. Records were poor. So when the story was published, it came as a shock that CBA had let people down like this. When someone is in shock, they don't hear much. They certainly don't hear a long string of numbers and facts. The shock quickly turns to anger, and that's when our stakeholders become involved and take up the mantle, key of whom are politicians. A Senate inquiry was called, and after the usual theatre of a grilling in Canberra, a report was released that included a minority Labor recommendation for a Royal Commission. When people are angry, they look for someone to agree with their position. Step up Senator Sam Dastyari. Anger is fueled and the initial response is not heard or is misunderstood. That's when retribution starts. Again, a mistake of ours was to establish the full remediation and review program for customers, but without giving the context of how fast it was going to work and when it would end. It is a comprehensive program and it's got complete independent oversight. But again, that wasn't enough for our critics, who were convinced that nothing short of shutting down the business was going to be good enough. Finally, recovery is the hardest phase to get into. This is where having a really good understanding of the environment and the stakeholders is critical. What we understood that when the debate had become very much contained within a small but active group of journalists, the issue was still continuing on. While the broader public may have moved on and our customers were saying, just get the work done, there are still a subset of people that are very focused on us. In CBA's case, I'd argue that we're only just starting to find a path to recovery. But the political football which the Royal Commission call has created means that the issue will not go away, no matter how much the business has improved and how much we want it to go away. I believe that as a business we have improved enormously. The scrutiny and attention that these issues have brought to us have created a major focus and been a major factor in the transformation program now in place. It means that within our business, problems are detected early, so-called bad apples are weeded out, and when things go wrong, we can work quickly to put them right. I'm not saying we're perfect, and no business or industry is perfect. Mistakes will happen. And you can look at the papers today, and I can give you a bit of an insight that ASIC are coming out with a report again about the wealth management business from that period where fees were overcharged, and that not just a CBA thing, but across the banks more broadly. But when there are the issues, the first thing we do now is we stop and we ask ourselves, what is it that people are really saying? What is it that the facts won't address? If we need to deal with the emotion, what is it we need to say immediately? Often it's simply sorry. It's simply that we will take accountability and we'll work to put things right. We'll continue to be in the focus of the media, although the main media spotlight will undoubtedly move on to someone else, and not that I wish that on anyone else. But like the live export industry, it's vitally important that we learn the lessons from the experiences that we've been through. Like us, your industry has a very important social purpose. It provides a cost-effective, humane supply chain for food to countries where access to that resource or that infrastructure is limited. You feed vast parts of the world. But to maintain that license to do that, you must keep evolving your sector to be highly transparent about its standards, swift to act, and give a voice in response to the emotions when they come up. There is no silver bullet which one can achieve the social balance. I do think you've got a very good story to tell, from your farmers to your logistics, to the people who oversee your operations, to your suppliers and the investment that you make in rural and regional Australia, to the work you're needing to do to remain competitive and provide a quality product. There is a story here with real purpose and real social good to be explained. But like trust in institutions, it will keep changing, and that's why we need to keep changing and adjusting how we talk. It isn't a perfect science, but in a world where there are many voices in the debate, we all have a job to speak up and say something. My message today, that as a starting point, at all times we need to understand what that conversation is really about. We need to listen, and we need to make sure that everything we say is said in the right way. Very happy to take questions. Thank you. I can.
Questions, please, to Andrew, if you've got them. Alistair. Al, just hang on, just got a mic there.
Andrew. Sorry. Do you have a crisis management team on call for
Yes.
any emergency? Yep.
Yes, it's my team. No, we actually have a crisis management system within the bank. It's actually regulated by APRA as a prudential requirement of a bank, because at all times you need to be able to maintain a flow of the right communication in a circumstance that could range from systems being down through a worst case scenario of a run being on the bank. It is a very well developed and exercise system. We exercise it all the time, so we have drills all the time. People are very clear about their role and responsibility within that crisis management. We have people who are trained as the chairs, and an operating rhythm that gets kicked into place immediately something happens. I'll share with you, yesterday we had some payment systems that are down. At the moment, banks are becoming more and more important to day-to-day life because as society is going more and more cashless, that plastic card is becoming more and more critical. And when our payment systems go down, even briefly, people are stuck in car parks, they can't pay for their restaurant bill, and hotels, taxis and the like. So the world starts to melt down very quickly, and social media drives that very fast. So we have a range of set processes, we have a range of predetermined scripts and playbooks according to the crisis that we can pick up and implement really quickly to be able to respond to people, to give them assurance that we're working on a problem, that we know what's happening, and that it'll be resolved when we get line of sight over the resolution of it. So it's a very well developed and well-oiled machine, which I think we're getting better and better at. It's something that's under constant review. The world of social media has dramatically changed that. A few years ago, you may see 2 or 3 comments on social media in an hour. If something goes wrong today within the banking system, you can see up to 100 comments within 5 minutes. And that means we need to put our skates on and get moving to be able to respond to people.
Yeah. Just at the rear.
Up the back.
Hi, Anne.
I'll go with one here first, if you like. Thanks. Yeah.
Good morning, Andrew. How many financial planners from the Wealth Management Division were moved on after they were discovered to be doing the incorrect thing?
I should know that number because we gave it the other week to the House of Representatives hearing. Dozens and dozens. One of the problems we had with the financial planning matter was that when the problems came to light, a lot of the so-called bad apples had already actually left the business and had moved on themselves, and there were very few left. The one that was the lead one that featured in the Fairfax press was a guy called Don Nguyen, who was based in Sydney, and he had taken leave and made a claim on his trauma policy, and these days I understand works in a dry cleaners or something. But yes, a lot of them had already moved on. The industry's changed enormously now. There's a lot of government regulations in place that have come in the last couple of years. Qualifications are coming online for financial planners. I think the truth about financial planning is that it is a maturing industry, and it's a little bit like the real estate agent industry's had to mature over the years, and what we've seen, accountants and lawyers and other professions have matured over centuries. The financial planning industry is maturing at a rapid rate because Australians' retirement savings are building up really fast, and the need for financial planners is basically increasing. And I think government regulation and industry per se have not been as fast as they should have been in maintaining the sort of standards in financial planning, but that is changing.
Thank you, Andrew. Julie Iomi from Dairy Australia. Just wondering if you've got any advice or experience around effectively saying sorry, because often we can see if from recent events like sports people, apologies can be misconstrued or make the situation worse if you don't quite pitch it right. Have you got any experience of how to effectively apologise? Well,
I mean, the starting point, it needs to be authentic. And I think the biggest trick that the biggest mistake I see is when people write, "We are sorry." Accountability is the key, and behind saying sorry, people are looking for accountability. So I think the word "I am sorry" is really important. The whole organisation may be sorry and upset that something has happened, but accountability is really what I think our stakeholders are looking for, and someone who can be big enough to stand up and say, "I'm sorry and I'm going to work to fix this up." That's the first step in being able to deal with what is an emotional response.
With our industry, we're often quite reactive rather than proactive because we try and stay under the radar, I suppose, where we all have a lot of good stories, but we're fearful of bringing it out because it brings attention back to an industry that's a bit on the nose. How does your bank deal with, are you focusing on proactive movements, or are you just trying to sit under the radar and be ready for reaction?
Yeah, and look, this is an experience that I've been through at the bank. This is an experience I went through at Woolworths. People are actually very interested to know what your industry does. And quite often the industry has become, for want of a better description, punch drunk and not willing to step into the fray again, only to have it itself belted around, and I can completely understand why you would feel that way. And that's why I said quite often our reaction is to not say anything, let's just get on and get our job done, keep our heads down, understand where there are problems and deal with them ourselves. The reality is actually people are very interested, and when you do tell your story, you actually do start to convert what is a large group of people that are sitting in the middle that actually don't have an opinion either way. And they're interested in understanding how you're improving. Another experience that we've been through at the bank in the last couple of years has been the focus that activists have brought on the banking sector around our lending to fossil fuels. I think after the failure of the carbon tax and the politicisation of that debate, activists actually moved away from targeting the political parties and thought, who can we target? Let's target the supply chain, and the banks sit in that supply chain. So we had a collection of about 40 environmental groups that have been focused on targeting all the banks, because all the banks have some institutional lending that they do to the fossil fuel sector. The approach we've taken at the Commonwealth Bank around our exposure to fossil fuels is to actually be more open and transparent about what we are doing, because we found that the activists were enormously misrepresenting our position in this debate. So nowadays we have completely available, and the business was concerned about this because it's not something we'd ever done. But all of our lending in the fossil fuel sector is now completely disclosed on our website, and we update it every year. And we're effectively, and as well as our lending to renewables and the like, and we're effectively saying to the world, please come and have a look and see what we do. We're not saying we will not invest in fossil fuels. We will. We have to. We invest in Australia, and it's one of Australia's key resources industries. But look at the balanced picture. And when you look at the balanced picture, we're investing more in renewables and other growing parts of the energy demand sector these days than in the traditional coal sector. And if we make decisions to massively increase our exposure to coal for whatever reason into the future, you will see that. We'll be upfront about it. And that transparency bit has been the largest part, because it takes away this gotcha moment, this shock, and that's what the activists worked on. Shock. You know, the Commonwealth Bank has got $2 billion of money exposed to the fossil fuel sector, which is going to be a stranded asset, and it creates a great emotional response.
Thanks. Could I just ask one more in regards to a previous comment in the move to a cashless society and the way technology is moving at a rapid rate? For those who are South Australians, we all know we had no electricity basically in the whole state for quite some time, and a number of days in some areas. Walking home through the streets of Adelaide where everything was shut down, people were getting kicked out of the pub because you couldn't pay for a drink, people couldn't get out of the car parks. So are we heading in a direction that we can melt down more rapidly, or do we all need to go back to the old days and have $1,000 stuck under the pillow? Or does the bank see a backup system where if power or technology fails, life doesn't stop, basically?
Yeah, I think in the South Australian case, that is an example when a whole state goes out of electricity, there are a whole lot of issues that flow on from that. And you know, you see it in countries overseas like South Africa and the like, where they have brownouts and the rest. And I think in those circumstances, people then do start to adjust. I guess, you know, society is shaped by the way people are moving, and the demand and the innovation and the technology is driving a cashless economy. You know, I think there is a generation coming through now who just are used to not having cash, and we can't stop that. And it is a way of the future. Funnily enough, governments love that because it means that there is greater data and they can see exactly where money is moving and where it's not moving. I understand the Reserve Bank and the government are very worried at the moment about the production of $100 bills. Basically, the mint can't keep up with the demand for $100 bills, which suggests that there is a shadow economy happening in this country where a lot of money is being shifted in hard cash. So governments, and companies all are aligned in wanting to move to what is a far more secure and better system. But it is posing new challenges that I think we're only just starting to get our minds around. Power is one of them. It's the most fundamental. The bigger challenge is going to be data security and cyber security. It's one of the fastest growing areas of investment for the bank. Once upon a time, the Commonwealth Bank's strength was symbolised by, the big building in Martin Place with a huge big vault downstairs, that you closed, and behind it was all the cash and gold and everything. These days, the strength of the Commonwealth Bank sits in a cybersecurity room in a nondescript street in Sydney where we have around 40 people around the clock monitoring the cyber activity coming in against the bank. And you saw some of the reports today about the RBA, and the banks are no different. So it is costing us a lot, and we are investing very heavily these days into cybersecurity to protect the bank. They're the sort of discussions that are on the horizon for banks and industries as we move into this modern world of a cashless society.
You mentioned your customer satisfaction ratings going up. So they're your customers, and you can measure them by polling them, etc. How do you measure whether you're successful in your mitigation strategies for public and social attacks on you?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great question.
And
yep.
how this kind of would reflect on our industry, and how do we measure that, etc. Because it's a very similar arrangement.
It is, and it's very subjective. So customer satisfaction has been a soft but hard measure, I guess, within the bank for a number of years, and we are going to go through this debate in the next short period of time because we're adjusting our executive remuneration to take into account those more softer targets around people and community and the like. Customer satisfaction has been very effective in improving things like your service experience, and I'd be bold enough to say that these days, those stories you used to hear about waiting in long lines at bank branches and the like, most of those are a thing of the past. People are largely very satisfied with their transactional relationship with banks. The apps, the technology, the convenience, the wait times on call centres, all the rest of it have come right down because we've invested heavily in it. The question that we're turning our mind to now is how do we measure trust? And that's what I was saying during the course of my speech, is that it's a very subjective measure. It's one that we can't just take a simple Roy Morgan type poll and do. You have to develop very deep relationships with your stakeholders and listen very carefully to what they're saying. And we know what customers are saying, and it's a familiar story. For me, it was a familiar story when I worked at Woolworths. People like their bank. They generally like their local branch, if they're still using it. They like the teller. They like the experience that they have. But if you ask them, do you like the Commonwealth Bank or do you like big banks, the answer will be going, not really, no. They're too big, they're too powerful. I think one of the things we need to turn the conversation back to is how we're shaped by the customer, and we've got to give them greater control. I think people don't like big institutions when they feel powerless and they don't have the control. And when we do things, make mistakes like the couple that I've talked about today, that's where we demonstrate that we've taken control out of people's hands and we've let them down. So measuring those trust factors is something that as a industry we're now very heavily focused on. I'd also quickly say that the industry has now come together in the last 6 months and developed up a 6-point action plan on a range of areas, including remuneration for our staff, a banking code of conduct, whistleblower activities, customer advocate work, and we've set some hard and fast targets to deliver on them. We've employed Ian McPhee, who was the Auditor General, to overlook them all. it's a very boring thing to say, and the average person in the street would probably shrug their shoulders and say, you should have done that a long time ago. But when it goes to that question around how do you build trust, it's when you stare into the things that you know for a long time have been the burr in the saddle and have been bringing down those levels of trust, and you get that collective line of thought around the industry that, hello, we need to actually work together and get these things off the agenda. That's when things start to happen. Up the back.
I can handle.
One more.
All right, thanks, John. What's been the greatest catalyst for change? You know, you said the bank's gone through a lot of change. Has it been regulatory, or has it been driven by social pressure? And what resistance did you come up against internally within the industry, and how was that overcome?
I think, in all honesty, the biggest catalyst of change comes from within our own people, because, you know, 50,000 people that come to work in the Commonwealth Bank every day don't come to work to do wrong, you know, and they want to believe that they're coming to work to do the right thing and have a bigger purpose in life. So where they read about, where they're at the barbecue, you know, and stopping conversation because they've announced that they're a banker, they don't want to do that. So there is a very strong push. You know, the question I get every day is, what else do we need to do, Andrew, to win back trust and the like? In banking, probably one of our greatest challenges is our greatest strength, and that is our risk management approach. Banks are very focused on risk at all times. So when you talk about making change, the first thing the bank would like to do is understand the risk that introduces. And when you can go through those processes, that can take a long time and can be frustrating. And for the external stakeholders, they sit back and they just ask the question, why don't you just change it? You know. So I found it's a combination of both you don't waste a crisis, the community pressure, the stakeholder information that's coming back in that drives the speed of change, but also explaining back out to those stakeholders what it is that we need to be able to do to make sure the changes we make don't threaten the strength and stability of the bank, which is fundamental to our existence.
How are we going? More questions?
In the middle.
Yes, go.
Andrew, having worked in agriculture and the supermarket sectors, you would have seen credence claims becoming more normalised, so organics or free range or whatever. And that's possibly a reflection of social licence and how the baseline, if you like, in social licence has moved. How does an industry that is being, in inverted commas, adversely affected by this creep in social licence engage with the greater community, and in particular urban communities?
I think, well, first of all, the transparency bit is important, but I think if you can anticipate if you're listening to your stakeholders and you can anticipate where things are going, it's incumbent on you to set the standards and set them hard and fast early. The free-range egg debate is a classic. If I roll my mind back to agriculture and then Woolworths days, it was very easy to slap free-range on a carton of eggs, or barn-laid, or all a variety of other different labelling options you had in the egg industry. I think what the egg industry has had to do is itself sort out what are its actual standards, and then be open and transparent about them and set them rather than have them set for them, again, by parliaments and the like. I think industries that are able to anticipate and get ahead of that expectation and set the standards are the ones that are able to maintain the debate. Now, again, I've had experience where that's failed in a number of areas, and I would say we're only just starting to learn how to do that again in banking, and I hope we learn from that. So,
any further questions?
No worries, Don.
Well, Andrew, thank you very much. It was a very insightful, I'll grab this for a second, it was a very insightful address, and I'm sure there are each and every one of us in this room in one way or another, as you are aware, obviously when you're invited to do this, there was a purpose behind it, there's a parallel with our industry and some of the things you spoke about. and I think there's some very, very powerful messages in what you're saying. And I mean, obviously the banks learnt enormously, probably will have more learning experiences, but I'd have to say it was a fantastic address and information for this industry for now and for the future. We went through a fairly tough period, as you know, in 2011, and the parallels were very similar. So I hope people have enjoyed Andrew's address, learnt something from it, and pick up and run with it in the future. Thank you very much, Andrew.